In 1944, one lone American plant actually outproduced the entire Japanese empire. This wasn't some massive network or federal project, just one firm in a Long Island town. At its peak, they finished a fresh P-47 Thunderbolt every single hour. Those crews never paused. The lights stayed on. 24,000 staff, mostly women, built 15,000 fighters in 4 years. Those birds flew 750,000 sorties, helping crush Nazi Germany from above. So where's this planet now? It's gone. A shopping mall sits right where those legendary planes were once made. Then in 1987, Republic Aviation's full archive, every single blueprint and legal contract, every file dating to 1931 was tossed into the trash. No museum wanted them. No government agency saved them. Only 2 workers with bags, while a guard watched. 50 years of history vanished in one quick afternoon. This is Republic Aviation's Forgotten Legacy, Part 1. Flight was in his very soul. Before founding the factory, he had to prove his aerial worth. His father was an early Russian private pilot. Not a military or state craft, but a private one. A modified Blériot 11 sat on the estate like a horse. Alexander Seversky entered the world on June 7, 1894 in Tiflis, a Russian city now known as Tbilisi, Georgia. From nobility, his father taught him flight by age 14. No theory or drills, just real flying in actual planes before most people even saw one up close. That same year, he joined the Imperial Russian Naval Academy, entering as a veteran pilot rather than a student merely seeking stripes. A guest was designer Igor Sikorsky, the man who would later build the helicopters utilized by today's American presidents. Such was Alexander's youth. By 1914, he earned his aeronautical engineering degree. He was 20 when global war broke out. He didn't wait to be assigned. He sought a combat transfer to the Baltic Fleet, flying the cold seas between Russia and Germany. His first trip almost ended it. In 1915, a bomb on his craft blew during takeoff. The plane never rose. The blast wrecked the machine and took his leg below the knee. Medics said he was done flying. He refused, even rejecting a higher amputation. His logic was surgical. More leg provided better balance and a chance to fly again. Once discharged, the Army grounded him forever. So he simply ignored the order. He hit an air show, stole into a fighter, and performed stunts for the crowd. One leg, no permission. He was busted instantly. Then Nicholas II personally stepped in. By July 1916, Seversky returned. 3 days later, he downed a German plane. He flew 57 missions. He tallied at least 6 confirmed kills. Records say 13, making him a top Russian ace. He earned the highest honors the empire offered. Then the empire fell. In 1918, Seversky was in Washington on a diplomatic trip. When the Bolsheviks took over, the government died. His mission was over. He stayed for good. At 23, he was stranded with a wooden leg, dead metals, and bold ideas. This marked the start of something far greater. Part 2, the Russian immigrant with hundreds of patents. He landed with medals and a restless mind. His first move was simple. He opened a Manhattan restaurant. It failed fast. Within months, Seversky pitched his skills as an engineer and pilot to the military. The War Department agreed. He advised on production and tested planes for an army learning to fly. There he met Billy Mitchell. Mitchell was a general with a theory the military found very annoying. That air power made ships obsolete and planes would decide future wars. He argued solo against old-school officers convinced the future would mimic the past. Seversky didn't just agree. He championed the cause for life through books and public speeches. He hammered the point. Controlling the sky meant winning the war. He wasn't just a talker. In his early American years, Seversky filed 364 patents. Back in 1923, while collaborating with the Sperry gyroscope outfit, Seversky engineered the inaugural gyro-stabilized bomb sight, a tool employing a rapid-spin rotor to maintain precision despite heavy air turbulence. Payloads dropped using that gear actually found their marks. Simultaneously, he helped pioneer a nascent mid-air refueling technique to swap gas between 2 flying birds. In 1923, the general public still found the mere act of flight miraculous. Seversky was busy figuring out how to keep them aloft forever. That year, he launched the Seversky Aero Corporation to monetize his intellectual property. By 1927, he had secured American citizenship and a major's rank within the Army, Air Corps Reserve. On February 16, 1931, With Wall Street titan Edward Moore's backing, he opened the Seversky Aircraft Corporation in Farmingdale. His patents formed the company's backbone. He picked that Long Island spot on purpose. Both Grumman and Fairchild were already nearby. The local talent and specialized shops were ready. Seversky provided the one thing rivals couldn't replicate: pure salesmanship. He piloted his own birds in national contests and crushed speed benchmarks. He was a natural on camera and impossible for the press to ignore. Every competition served as a live commercial, filmed by news crews obsessed with the dashing one-legged combat ace turned industrialist. In 1938, at age 44, he crossed from New York to London, solo shattering the transatlantic record with a wooden leg. Behind those flashy headlines, however, the books were bleeding out. Those air shows weren't cheap. Government deals never quite broke, even against his massive marketing spend. The board grew restless. The entertainer had built a powerhouse, but he lacked the discipline to manage it. Chapter 3. The Georgian on the Paris Express. While Seversky was chasing trophies and filing paperwork in New York, another man was approaching the same destination from a different life. Alexander Kartveli arrived in 1896 in Tbilisi, Georgia, the same town as Seversky, just 2 years his junior. They were total strangers. Coming from worlds apart, they wouldn't cross paths for nearly 15 years. Yet the city that forged them was identical. Kartveli's route into the clouds went through the heart of Paris. Following the Great War, the short-lived Democratic Republic of Georgia funded his French studies. He finished at a top aeronautical school in 1922. Going home was no longer an option. During his time in Paris, the Red Army had swallowed Georgia whole. The nation that sponsored his education had vanished. Kartveli remained in France, finding work at Blériot Aéronautique. That firm was started by the first pilot to cross the English Channel. A prototype he designed there actually set a world record. His name stayed out of the papers. He just absorbed the expertise and moved forward. In 1927, American tycoon Charles Levine recruited him to New York for the Atlantic Aircraft Corporation. When that venture folded, Kartveli was stuck in the States with high-level skills, but no boss. He eventually headed toward Farmingdale. In 1931, Kartveli walked into Seversky's shop and became chief engineer instantly. Two men from Tbilisi, born in one city, fleeing the same shattered world, landed in America via completely different paths, only to work 30 feet apart in a Long Island hangar. It's the sort of fluke you only see in movies. They were opposites. Seversky was the quintessential hype man. He flew stunts, gave quotes, and charmed brass and bankers with effortless charisma. He functioned as the public identity of the brand. Kartveli, meanwhile, never spoke to reporters. He lived at a drafting board, grinding through variables with graphite and math until a perfect solution manifested. While Seversky electrified a room, Kartveli stripped it of everything but the work. He was cold, clinical, and virtually anonymous to anyone who didn't spend their days reading technical blueprints. Their first big win was the BT-8, an all-metal training monoplane, and the first such model given to the Army Air Corps. There was a snag: Army rules capped trainer engines at 400 horsepower. At that limit, the BT-8 was a death trap for rookies. It was phased out quickly. It was a hopeful start that stalled, but in 1936, Kartveli delivered a winner. The P-35 was the first American warbird to feature three elements now vital to every fighter jet: a closed-in canopy, wheels that tucked away, and a full metal skin. These weren't just for looks. Each tweak boosted velocity, altitude, and toughness. The Army signed off on a massive production run. Republic finally had a real military contract. Kartveli never saw the spotlight. For years, his designs were top secret. You wouldn't find his name in the daily news. He just produced results and stayed in the shadows. He passed in 1974. Modern historians now liken him to Nikola Tesla, a man whose genius was foundational to the modern world, yet unknown to the people he protected. The planes he drafted shifted the tide of the war, and that war changed the entire world. Chapter 4. The creator gets the boot from his own firm. By April 1939, the Seversky Aircraft Corporation had bled over $550,000. In that era's economy, the business was basically on life support. The planes themselves weren't the issue. The P-35 was a massive leap forward. The real problem was the guy running the show. Seversky was a reckless spender. He dumped hash into experimental research that offered no quick payoff. Flashy air show stunts that boosted his ego more than the bank account. and grand promises the company simply couldn't deliver on. He treated the corporate treasury like a personal piggy bank to fund whatever his latest obsession happened to be. By 1939, the ledger reflected every single one of those poor choices. The board headed by moneyman Paul Moore moved to fire him. Seversky didn't go down without a fight. He challenged the tally sparked public feuds and tried to sue his way back in. That legal war lasted 3 years and wasn't settled until September 1942, long after the firm had moved on. By October 1939, they had already rebranded. The Seversky Aircraft Corporation was officially reborn as Republic Aviation. The founder's name was scrubbed from the building. Kartveli, however, stayed put. This was the turning point for everything. The directors kicked Seversky out but kept his lead engineer. Kartveli wasn't just a follower, he was the firm's true technical engine. The new bosses saw that clearly. Republic Aviation's future value sat at Kartveli's drafting table, not in Seversky's theatrical self-promotion. They kept the man who built the planes and axed the man who wasted the money. Kartveli rose to vice president and lead designer at Republic. Under him, the company would churn out 15,000 P-47 Thunderbolts. The man who started it all never stepped foot in the office again. Seversky shifted gears, exiled from the industry he loved. He took up writing and public speaking, still convinced air superiority was the key to modern warfare. With nothing but time, he laid out his case. In 1942, he dropped victory through air power. His pitch long-range strategic bombing could win the war without needing a bloody ground invasion. It moved over 350,000 copies. In 1942, with the war's end, a mystery people were desperate for a plan that actually made sense. Seversky gave them hope. Even Walt Disney was a fan, putting his own money into a movie version of the book. It was a mix of cartoons and live-action clips featuring Seversky himself explaining his maps and models. That film reached millions who never would have cracked open the original book. Military brass hated it, launching a smear campaign to silence him, but they couldn't stop the momentum. Public opinion swung his way. By 1945, President Truman gave Seversky the Medal of Merit for reshaping military strategy and public perception. 6 years after being fired, the man was getting a White House shout-out for helping win World War II. In 1969, at age 75, he earned the Exceptional Service Medal from the Air Force. He was still taking bows while pilots flew jets his old firm built under Kartveli's lead. Seversky passed away in 1974. Kartveli died that same year. The duo that made Republic Aviation what it was, the dreamer and the builder, both exited the stage together. The takeaway is simple: being a creative genius doesn't make you a good manager. Seversky had the vision to see the future of flight, the guts to risk it all, and the charm to lead the pack. But he lacked the self-control to run a shop without going broke. He built a legacy, then watched it slip away. He spent 35 years observing his creation flourish from the sidelines. Chapter 5. The Train Car Doodle. In 1940, the American military was glued to the Battle of Britain, knowing they were looking at their own impending reality. Nazi and British dogfights over the English Channel were providing raw data that the folks in D.C. couldn't afford to ignore. The conclusion for American strategists was crystal clear. If the U.S. jumped into the fray, their heavy bombers needed bodyguards that could fly deep into German territory. The B-7 could reach Berlin, but the fighters couldn't. Existing planes didn't have the fuel capacity or the high-altitude muscle for long-range escort duty. They needed a miracle, and they needed it yesterday. Kartveli was called to Washington, where the Army delivered the bad news about the XP-44. Republic's newest project was dead on arrival. Too slow, too short range. Years of sweat were trashed in one meeting, and the Army refused to pay for a replacement. If Republic wanted to win, they'd have to fund the prototype themselves. Kartveli boarded the train to New York, somewhere between D.C. and Penn Station. Flipping open his pad, he started drawing. His vision flew in the face of every established rule in aviation. The experts claimed dogfighters had to be light and agile, constructed around the tightest possible frame to house a decent motor, shed every ounce to keep the power-to-weight ratio high. While every major Air Force chased that setup, Kartveli ignored it. He centered his entire project on a single choice: grab the most brutal aircraft engine in existence. That beast was the Pratt & Whitney R28000 Double Wasp, a two-row 18-cylinder radial powerhouse pushing 2,535 horses. Being air-cooled, it could take a beating that would sideline liquid-cooled rivals. This same heart would eventually drive the Hellcat and Corsair, cementing the R-2800's legacy as the most vital engine of the Second World War. Yet the motor wasn't the plane's true soul. That came from what Kartveli tucked away in the back. Down in the tail section, he rigged up a massive turbo-supercharger that wasn't crank-driven, but rather fueled by the plane's own scorching exhaust. Spent gas from the R-2800 traveled through internal pipes the whole length of the body to spin a turbine in the rear. That wheel crushed incoming air and sent it back up front through a cooler to drop the temps before hitting the carb. Chilled air meant a thicker charge. A thicker charge meant a bigger bang. A bigger bang meant massive power. Kept steady at high altitudes where the thin air choked out every other standard engine on the market. Up at 25,000 feet, the German Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs were already gasping for breath and losing steam. But the P-47's R-28,000 fed by that rear-mounted turbo was still screaming at full tilt. In the high-altitude kill zones where the European air war was won, the P-47 held a built-in mechanical edge. Kartveli knew from day one this bird would be a giant. He told his team something that became aviation legend. It'll be a dinosaur, sure, but a perfectly built one. He didn't care about the bulk. He ignored the scale. He pushed forward because the math checked out. On June 12, 1940, Kartveli turned in the official XP-47B plans. The prototype got the green light on September 6th. Just a week later, on September 13, 1940, the Army signed for 161 B models and 62 C models. The deal cost $56,499,924. Republic slapped the prototype together with whatever was handy, including a cockpit from an old P-43. When it hit the scales, the XP-47B clocked in at 12,550 pounds, nearly half a ton over the limit. No one blinked. They cleared it for takeoff. The flight data ended every single doubt about the design. It clocked 412 miles per hour at 25,800 feet. In 1941, no other fighter on Earth could touch it up there. The turbo-supercharger hit its numbers exactly. The nickname came from Republic's military lead, C. Hart Miller. He went with Thunderbolt to keep the company's naming streak alive. It was the perfect name for that beast. Heavy roaring and nearly impossible to stop once it got moving. Part 6, the factory where the sun never set. By June 1942, the Army Air Forces got their first batch of P-47Bs and immediately wanted more than the plant could build. Instead of cutting the order, they decided to just build more factories at lightning speed. Republic expanded this Farmingdale site 4 times over and paved 3 runways in months, all while the assembly lines never stopped moving. People were building planes inside skeletons of buildings. Walls were being raised on one end while crews riveted tails on the other. Even that wasn't fast enough. In November 1942, the Army greenlit a second P-47 plant in Evansville, Indiana. Before the foundation was even dry, Republic was already cranking out parts in rented auto garages and old warehouses. The Evansville plant finished in August 1943, 3 months early, with a third of its first run built before the roof was on. On April 27, 1943, President Roosevelt hit Evansville during a massive 20-state tour of the country's war machine. He walked the shop floor to hand out E awards to the workers for their incredible production speed. Only 5% of defense plants ever saw that award. Evansville would eventually take home 3 of them. By 1944, Farmingdale had 24,000 people working 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No breaks for holidays, no slowing down. On that production line, Tuesday felt exactly like Sunday. Republic was cranking out over 30% of the fighters shipped to Europe. In fact, 1 out of every 3 American warplanes seen over German skies was a Long Island original. By the tail end of 1943, the Republic team had already rolled 5,000 P-47 Thunderbolts off the line. On September 20th, 1944, a big celebration broke out on the Elwood Farmingdale factory floor to mark the delivery of the 10,000th plane. Cameras flashed and officials gave their speeches, but the assembly lines never stopped moving for a second during the festivities. When production hit its stride in late 1944, 28 fully finished aircraft were rolling out of the building every single day, 28 every day. Before the Pearl Harbor attack, the American manufacturing world was pretty set in its ways. The general consensus was that women just weren't cut out for making planes. People assumed the job required a level of technical skill and pinpoint accuracy that women supposedly lacked. Nobody really questioned that logic because they didn't have to. There were plenty of men available. The door was shut until Pearl Harbor blew it wide open. With millions of men shipping out, women stepped up to the plates at factories from Farmingdale to Evansville. They went through intense training lasting 6 to 10 weeks. These women mastered riveting, learned to decipher complex engineering blueprints, and got comfortable running high-precision industrial machinery. They could even reach into tight airframe spots where larger hands couldn't fit. Moving from desks and shop counters, they transformed into skilled aircraft builders. Soon enough, bosses were raving about them for the very traits people thought they lacked, being precise, patient, and incredibly focused on the task at hand. The crew in Evansville started calling themselves the Raiderettes. Even so, the plant's newsletter kept track of their output while reminding them to stay ladylike. Meanwhile, another group of women over at Farmingdale was taking on a completely different but equally vital mission. The WASPs, or Women Air Force Service Pilots, were tasked with flying those brand new P-47s straight off the production line. They'd arrive from the Hotel Huntington each morning, inspect the cleared birds, and ferry them to Newark for shipment abroad. Each pilot handled up to 6 planes daily. After finishing their deliveries, they'd hitch a ride back in a C-60 transport plane piloted by 2 of their fellow WASP members. Every P-47 that went to Britain in 1944, or to France and Italy after the invasion, had a woman at the controls for its first American flight. The supply chain would have stalled out completely without them. Tucked under Hangar 2's final assembly floor was a hidden vault full of live ammunition. Right before a test flight, technicians would load up the 850 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings of the P-47 right there. The pilot would head out over the water to a firing range, blast the guns to check the sights, and then head back to base. After that, it was Newark and then the front lines. But once the war wrapped up, women were the first to get pink slips to make room for returning vets. This men-first hiring policy was standard practice across the entire industry, no matter how good the women were at their jobs. Women who spent years building the most advanced planes on Earth were laid off at much higher rates than the men they worked alongside. One supervisor from the Evansville plant later looked back on the post-war closures and described the general vibe of the era quite bluntly. He said the men basically expected the women to just head back home and get back to the kitchen exactly like things were before the fighting started. A lot of those women had walked into those plants without knowing the first thing about mechanics or engineering. They picked up a specialized trade in 6 weeks and spent 3 years building the heavy hitters that flew 30,000 combat sorties over Nazi Germany. All that experience didn't count for much when it came time to cut the staff. The country needed them for the war, but not for the peace. Chapter 7, The Bird That Broke the Luftwaffe, the P-47, Thunderbolt finally saw its first real action in April of 1943. It started with a fighter sweep across occupied France with the 4th Fighter Group, a unit filled with veteran American pilots. These guys were used to flying Spitfires for the British, and they weren't exactly thrilled with their new American rides at first. These pilots had a very specific idea of what a top-tier fighter plane should feel like when they were in the seat. They wanted something light and agile that could outmaneuver anything. The P-47 was the total opposite. It was massive, wide, and looked like a tank. One pilot mocked it as a 7-ton milk bottle. The group's commander hated the thing and didn't hide it, an attitude that quickly spread to all his pilots. Consequently, that group ended up with the fewest kills of any of the initial P-47 units operating in Europe. However, other pilots discovered its secret strength. Once you got above 15,000 feet, that turbo-supercharger turned the plane into a beast. Near the ground, the P-47 felt heavy and a bit sluggish, but high in the sky, it turned into a completely different animal. The German Focke-Wulf 190 and Messerschmitt 109 struggled high up because their engines couldn't breathe as well in the thin air. But the R-2800 engine inside the P-47 was a different story entirely. Thanks to its massive turbo, it kept pumping out full power even at high altitudes. At 25,000 feet, the Thunderbolt could outrun anything the Germans had. And then there was its ability to dive. The P-47 could pick up speed heading down so fast that no German pilot could ever hope to keep up. Pilots learned to use that height as their best weapon, climb high, pick a target, and then drop down at speeds that let them control the whole fight. Once they finished their run, they'd use that crazy momentum to zoom back up to a safe altitude and get ready for the next pass. A pilot who mastered these boom and zoom tactics was almost impossible to shoot down. The plane wasn't built for dogfighting, and it didn't need to be. Packed with power-heavy plating and 850 caliber guns, Francis Gabby Gabreski knew its potential better than anyone. Flying for the 56th Fighter Group, he used the P-47 to down 28 German planes over 166 sorties. He led the European theater as the top ace, followed by Robert S. Johnson, who claimed 27 kills with the same unit. Every single victory was achieved behind the stick of a P-47. Johnson once limped home with over 200 holes from cannon and machine gun fire that should have been fatal. The plane made it back, and the enemy definitely took notice of that resilience. Heinz Baer, a Luftwaffe ace with 200-plus wins, called the P-47 a flying tank that demanded extreme caution. Having fought every Allied model, Baer feared the Thunderbolt more than almost anything else in the sky. Statistics backed his fear as the P-47 flew over 746,000 combat missions during the conflict. That is more flight time than the Mustang Warthog and Lightning combined. Its kill-to-loss ratio stood at 4.6 to 1, meaning it downed nearly 5 enemies for every one lost. With a tiny 0.7% loss rate per mission, it led the European theater while dropping 132,000 tons of bombs. Fully loaded, one P-47 carried half the payload of a B-17 bomber while flying at nearly double its speed. From the invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, until victory in Europe on May 8, 1945. These pilots annihilated 86,000 rail cars, 9,000 engines, 6,000 tanks, and 68,000 trucks. The Wehrmacht relied entirely on those supply lines to move fuel and troops to the front lines. The P-47 methodically shredded those routes, hitting column after column and train after train across the Belgian and French countryside, reaching all the way into Germany. By the end, German troops lacked supplies, not because of factory failures, but because the supply lines were severed. When the Messerschmitt 262 jet and Arado 234 arrived, experts predicted piston planes were finished. Most thought traditional fighters would be sitting ducks against the new German jet technology. P-47 pilots, however, developed a much more practical solution. They pounced during takeoff and landing, catching the jets while they were too slow to escape. The Thunderbolt claimed 20 jet fighters and 4 jet bombers. This way it was blunt, but it worked. Republic eventually built the P-47M to chase down Vorn rockets and jets at high speeds. This version featured a 2,800 horsepower engine, hitting 473 miles per hour, the fastest American piston fighter of the war. When the military swapped P-47s for P-51s in 1944, one group famously refused the upgrade. Gabreski's 56th Fighter Group, the highest-scoring unit with over 674 kills, chose to keep their Thunderbolts until the end. Those pilots had total faith in what their heavy-duty aircraft could survive. They were forged by hundreds of missions and refused to switch as Republic turned out over 15,000 planes at Farmingdale. Combined production across all facilities eventually topped 15,600 units. It stood as the most widely manufactured American fighter throughout the entire global conflict. Kartveli's original train ride sketches had delivered exactly what he planned 15,000 times over. Chapter 8, Post-War Jets, Korea and Vietnam. Following Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, the Army Air Forces pulled all P-47 contracts the very next day. There was no transition period, no winding down, and no grace period for the manufacturer. Just like that, the work sustaining 24,000 employees vanished overnight without any warning. Assembly lines that hadn't stopped in 4 years went dead quiet within days, leaving thousands out of work. A final ceremony for the last P-47N ended with a photo. That plane now sits in New York's Cradle of Aviation Museum. Kartveli never slowed down, having already drafted the XP-84 before the fighting even stopped. He didn't wait for the peace treaty or the layoffs to start his next project. While the factory was still humming with 3 shifts of P-47 production, Kartveli was already designing its jet successor. The XP-84 relied on a radically different method of moving through the air. It featured a nose intake feeding a turbojet engine for straight-through combustion, no more propellers, just raw thrust. The XP-84 took its maiden flight on February 28, 1946 at Muroc Field in California, the legendary site that would be renamed Edwards Air Force Base shortly after the war's conclusion. By September 7, 1946, the second prototype clocked in at 607.2 miles per hour, a new record. Britain's Gloucester Meteor held the world record at 612.2 miles per hour, beating it by 5. Then the trouble started. In December 1947, the 14th Fighter Group at Maine's Dow Field began flying the F-84B. Usage limits hit within weeks. Pushing past Mach 0.8 caused the body's skin to buckle under air pressure. Its wings lacking proper research on how those fresh tip tanks impacted the frame buckled during high-speed maneuvers. Every F-84B was benched on May 24, 1948 because of wing integrity issues. An Air Force audit that year produced a report that surely terrified Republic's executives. This jet simply couldn't handle a single part of its assigned job. Officials nearly scrapped the whole project. It only pulled through because the overhauled F-84D, which fixed those major frame flaws, was deep in the manufacturing process. Republic nearly went bankrupt during this engineering disaster. They made it, though the outcome was incredibly close. The F-84G proved the project's worth. This model became the globe's inaugural solo cockpit jet to haul a nuke, specifically the Mark 7 bomb. Additionally, it debuted as the first mass-produced jet featuring an integrated mid-air refueling setup. 17 F-84Gs crossed from America to Britain without landing on August 20, 1953. Traversing 4,485 miles via mid-air fuel transfers, a record-breaking distance for jets then. Throughout Korea, the F-84 logged 86,408 combat missions, wiping out 60% of land. Objectives hit over the whole war. It served as the Air Force's main attack bird for that struggle, primarily hunting supply lines and transport hubs used by the North Korean and Chinese troops. The Thunderbirds also picked the F-84G as their very first plane. That's the Air Force's stunt squad from 1953 until 1955. This team showcased U.S. tech dominance during the early Cold War, using the F-84 to project that power to global crowds. Kartveli started drafting his last big engineering masterpiece in 1951. Military brass wanted a supersonic bomber to slip past Soviet radar down low drop, a nuke far behind enemy lines, and get home safely. That vision became the F-105 Thunderchief. Upon its debut, the F-105 was the biggest solo-pilot single-engine bird ever built for the branch. It weighed 50,000 pounds when fully loaded for departure. Its 14,000-pound payload beat a heavy B-17 from World War II. It hit Mach 2 way up high and Mach 1 right above the waves. Engineers designed the F-105 to scream through enemy airspace solo, hugging the deck at incredible speeds. Vietnam, however, forced it into a completely different role. Over 20,000 F-105 sorties targeted North Vietnam, braving the thickest anti-air fire ever seen. Out of 833 units, Vietnam claimed 397. MiGs only took down 17 in dogfights. Flak and missiles from the surface accounted for almost all the other losses. A jet meant for high-speed nuclear runs ended up hitting bridges at low heights, facing deadly fire. It wasn't armored to take. The F-105 marked Republic Aviation's final solo creation. Republic lacked any big projects to fill the void once F-105 manufacturing ceased in 1964. A firm that once staffed 24,000 workers and fueled a third of U.S. air strength in Europe was dying out. Chapter 9. Once the checks stopped coming and F-105 output wrapped in 1964, Republic's coffers were dry. They were left scraping by on minor subcontracts, mostly just stamping out tail sections for the McDonnell F-4 Phantom. No more original blueprints or finished planes, just making parts for competitors on temporary deals. The shrinking staff numbers said it all. Back in 1944, the Farmingdale plant hummed with over 24,000 employees, working nonstop around the clock. By the mid-60s, that headcount plummeted to about 3,700. The very same shop that used to pump out 28 finished jets every single day was now barely idling on dead-end tasks. Republic simply failed to fix its core weakness. The firm banked exclusively on Pentagon funding throughout its history. They never branched into the civilian market. ignored private buyers, and failed to build a safety net to survive losing big government deals. Their whole survival strategy rested entirely on securing defense work. Once the noise faded, only silence remained. During the early 1960s, Sherman Fairchild's aviation firm began stealthily snapping up Republic shares through public trades. The strategy was calculated. Bit by bit, every few months, Fairchild grabbed enough equity to seize total control. The takeover wrapped up by 1965. That July, the signatures dried on the final paperwork ending the deal. By September of 1965, Republic Aviation Corporation had officially vanished as a standalone entity. It was rebranded as Fairchild Hiller's Republic Aviation Division. The name that hung over the entrance for 26 years finally came down. A powerhouse that helped win the Second World War was swallowed by a massive corporation and given a new label. Manufacturing continued under the Fairchild Republic banner. The Farmingdale site was where they built the A-10 Thunderbolt II. This was Kartveli's ultimate creation, a ground attack jet designed around a 30mm Gatling gun built to annihilate heavy tanks. The Air Force still keeps it in active service today. The facility also crafted structural pieces for the Boeing 747 and built the vertical stabilizers for NASA's space shuttles, specifically Endeavour, Atlantis Challenger, and Columbia. In 1985, Fairchild announced it was quitting the commercial plane business. The downfall stemmed from the T-46 A trainer project meant to replace the Air Force's aging Cessna T-37 models. Plagued by massive costs and missed deadlines, the T-46A contract was eventually scrapped. By late 1987, Fairchild fired the final 3,500 Farmingdale workers and shuttered the site forever. After nearly 70 years, the factory's run ended. No fanfare, just a quick notice. Then the files were handled. That same fall, Joshua Saint, the curator of Long Island's Cradle of Aviation Museum, got a ring from an old contact at Republic. Fairchild, according to the contact, was about to trash the firm's entire collection of historical files. Every memo, blueprint, and log dating to 1931, when Seversky initially registered his early inventions, was marked for disposal. The complete paper trail of a vital American aircraft manufacturer was headed for the shredder. Did Stoff want one last look before the dumpsters arrived? He certainly did. Stoff drove out to the Farmingdale plant and entered a room packed with metal racks. He realized he was standing amid Republic Aviation's entire legacy, including every blueprint ever drafted, along with deep-dive engineering assessments and technical reports, daily shop logs, old photos and blueprints for jets that actually flew, plus some that never left the drawing board. Full documentation for every single project spanned 56 years and neatly filed by airframe type. Decades of American air power history were being tossed into bins by two laborers. A guy with a holster stood by making sure the job got done. Fairchild claimed the move was necessary because some files might still be classified. Sifting through 56 years of files to distinguish between restricted and public data was too tedious for the firm. Choosing total destruction was the easy way out. That guard's job was to ensure not a single page left that building until it was trashed. Stoff could look around, but taking anything was strictly against the rules. Staring at racks marked P-35, P-47, and F-1005 plus classified project codes, he realized the massive significance of what lay before him. The primary historical record of a giant in American industry was being treated like common garbage. Before sundown, all of it would be buried in a landfill. He took a chance. While the guard was distracted, STF grabbed a P-47 file, tucked it inside his jacket, and slipped out. Once safely in his car, he checked his loot. He held War Department Agreement 15,850, signed September 13, 1940. It was the primary contract for 225 P-47 aircraft totaling $16,275,657, 100 yellowing pages. The edges were worn, bearing signatures of men who had long since passed away. It turned out to be the only original document left from the entire history of the Republic Aviation Corporation. Everything else was simply gone. By late May 2015, a huge blaze tore through a derelict building at the old plant. It raged for hours, gutting the structure. Whatever soul remained in those walls vanished with the smoke. Chapter 10. A parking lot atop history. Today, if you head to Farmingdale and hit New Highway, you'll encounter a massive strip mall, a grocery store, a furniture outlet, and some fast food spots. plus a lot full of cars on the weekend. Beneath that tar lies the foundation where 24,000 laborers spent their careers during a vital era. 15,000 47 Thunderbolts were manufactured on the very spot where the Airport Plaza shopping center now stands. No commemorative plaque marks the site. The average shopper there has absolutely no clue. Only 3 original structures from the 1940s remain, a tiny fraction of what was once among the largest aircraft production hubs in America. Among them is the 1940 Assembly Bay, where P-47s underwent their final mechanical checks and fuelings, getting prepped for trial runs before the military took charge. In 2000, flight enthusiast Jeff Clayman established the American Air Power Museum right there. This museum is part of a rare global group that actually keeps its vintage planes in the air instead of just parking them. Their collection includes a functioning P-47D Thunderbolt that is still airworthy. When it takes flight, it uses the exact same tarmac utilized by Republic aviators back in 1943. While they were rolling out planes for the 8th Air Force in 1944, a hidden cellar sat beneath that hangar floor. The original ammo bunker remains exactly as it was built, off-limits to visitors and resting in total darkness. It is the final tangible link to the building's original purpose, serving as the lone relic of the Republic Aviation era. Here's the takeaway. Lesson 1 is that being a creative mastermind and a competent executive are two very different things. Seversky possessed the foresight to launch an aerospace firm, the charisma to hire top talent, and the flair to market his designs. However, he lacked any sense of financial control, spending money without a second thought. He viewed the company books as a means to fuel his ego rather than a boundary. He built a powerhouse and lost it in 8 years. The founder of a business is often the worst choice to lead it, and failing to recognize that kills more companies than anything else. The second takeaway, putting all your eggs in one basket, is a fatal mistake. Republic relied entirely on a single customer, the United States government. As long as the military placed orders, the company boomed. When the defense spending stopped, they had zero backup plan. With no private sales or civilian revenue to fall back on, they were at the mercy of the next government deal, a structural flaw that ruins any business. Every contract reaches its end eventually, and the real question is whether you have anything left when it does. The third point, nothing of value preserves itself. The entire 56-year library of technical blueprints from Republic Aviation, along with vital records of their engineering wins, was tossed into garbage bags and junked in a single afternoon. It only survived because one individual took a massive personal risk to rescue a single set of documents. That specific paperwork is now the only surviving primary record of the firm's legacy, proving that history requires active protection. Records only last if someone decides they are worth saving. Fourth, being elite today is no guarantee of lasting forever. During its prime, Republic employed 24,000 people and provided 30% of the American planes used in Europe, manufacturing the most popular fighter jet of the conflict. Today, that factory is just a place to buy groceries. Those planes helped win a world war, but the site now sells household goods. Past success is no shield against being forgotten. The fifth insight involves the designer Kartveli. He was the mind behind the P-47 and the A-10, which is still flying for the Air Force 50 years later, yet most Americans don't know him. For decades, the details of his work were top secret and could never be shared with the public. He passed away in 1974 in total obscurity, despite his designs fighting in 3 wars. The A-10 will likely outlive everyone who never knew his name. That summarizes the legacy of Republic Aviation, a firm started by a one-legged Russian aviator and a Georgian engineer, both refugees from countries that had ceased to exist. They built a weapon that defined World War II, hired tens of thousands, and helped shape the outcome of the 20th century's biggest conflict. Yet the company left almost zero trace except for 3 old warehouses, one flying P-47 and a lone contract saved from a dumpster. Meanwhile, the shopping center parking lot is packed every Saturday. People walk across that historic ground every single day without ever looking down.